Welcome to Level Up, the Career Playbook, aka How to Be Better at Your Job, brought to you by MambaHR.com. This is the podcast where we give you the tools, the strategies, and the insights to make your career thrive. Whether you're just starting out, navigating a pivot, or looking to build a legacy, this is the space to learn from the best in the game. All right, let's talk about what makes organizations thrive, and more importantly, what makes or breaks careers in today's world. The reality is, most companies focus on strategy, execution, and performance, but they often miss the most important factor, the people. How do you develop great leaders? How do you scale teams without chaos? How do you create a culture where people actually want to be there and stay? That is exactly what today's guest specializes in. Michel Nabti has spent his entire career designing the future of work. He has held leadership roles at Google, Waymo, and Mercer. He's built out leadership programs, he's scaled teams to IPO, he's coached executives on making better decisions. Michel has seen firsthand what works and what doesn't when it comes to organizational success. So today, we're going to unpack how to develop leadership skills that actually drive results, the biggest mistakes companies make when scaling teams, how AI is reshaping leadership in HR, and what separates high-performing executives from the rest. We're going to talk about the real strategies to level up your career and level it up fast. This episode is for anyone who wants to grow as a leader, build better teams, or just understand how work is changing in the AI era. Michel, welcome to the show. How the hell are you?
I'm doing great, Brian. Thanks for inviting me to the Level Up podcast. I'm excited for our conversation.
Like we just talked about before I hit record, the reason why I started this, got laid off and was like, how do I make sure that this doesn't happen? I feel like there's some unspoken things that some of the best people do that unless you have a great mentor or a great manager, you might not learn. So the point of the podcast is I'm going to go out and find the best of the best people I know and people I don't know to sit down for an hour or so and just learn what are the best people doing. And that's why you were here. You and I worked together 10 plus years ago now. And I remember working with you and you were amazing then. And you've stuck in my mind about the best L&D person. And so it's amazing that we're having this full circle moment where I am able to pick your brain a little bit more 10 years down the road after working together.
Yes, well, L&D and organizational development are crucial components to successful companies and to successful individuals. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, so this is the Level Up podcast brought to you by MambaHR.com. MambaHR is an app that I'm working on behind the scenes to try to make HR a little bit easier, like a business partner in your pocket. Mamba comes from Kobe Bryant. So this is a sports-related themed podcast. So in the spirit of that, I'm going to have different segments and they're going to be sports-ish related. And we're trying to keep that theme. Might be corny, but that's what we're going to try to do. So the first segment is the pregame. We're going to talk about the foundations, your foundations, and the foundation of leadership and org success. But before we get into the nitty-gritty questions, who are you? Who the hell are you? Why did I ask you to come on this podcast? Actually, I know, but I would love the listeners to know who the heck is Michel?
Sure. So I started my career in learning and development at Google when the company had just around 1,500 employees and was expanding from 5 US-based offices to 12 international offices. It was definitely a different era for the company. And during that time, I learned a lot about how people learn differently across different cultures, the role that learning and development and leadership development plays in organization success. And from there, I decided to pursue my graduate studies in organizational psychology. I worked for Mercer Delta Consulting, which was an organizational and leadership consulting practice within the Mercer ecosystem, primarily working with leadership in large Global 100 organizations on developing their leadership team capabilities, understanding people analytics for large-scale organization and strategic change. And then from there, I worked with Schaefer Consulting, a small consulting firm based in Connecticut that was one of the early developers of the workout methodology that was used at GE. And there I really learned about the importance of the ability of teams, line teams, to implement strategy and organization change, learning and development, and leadership development through rapid cycle organizational change initiatives that fed into larger, longer-term strategic impact for a company. From there, I then worked across the Middle East and Europe, doing organization and leadership development consulting work with companies that were based both in Europe and the Middle East, with a big emphasis on developing the capabilities of local talent to take on leadership roles in companies where they were depending heavily on expat talent. And that really informed a lot of my understanding on the role that cross-cultural components and culture plays in how we think about leadership in companies that are today almost all global. And then from there, I've been back in Silicon Valley, working with a lot of different companies on rapid scale growth, organization scaling, and building healthy organizations where people can achieve great things.
So you've done just a little bit of stuff here and there. That's impressive. And Google at 1,500 people. So you were there when like all the books that we have from how Google has done it is created. That was from that kind of that time, that era of time when you were there, that's mind blowing.
Yes, it really was a very formative time for the company in terms of thinking about building an innovative, healthy, scalable organization from the very beginning in super innovative ways. And one of the exciting things is that I had the opportunity to go back to Google X and at Waymo many years later in building that organization to what it is today.
And now Waymo is expanded now to Silicon Valley. I've taken a couple of them, just crazy. And if you really think about your impact in all these different companies, you're not the person that built the product or whatever, but you built the leaders that are actually having the most amount of leverage. And that's just, I don't know. I would be extremely proud if I was you to be able to say that you were a part of all these places because you really made an impact. All right. I will stop glazing so much and I'm going to get into some specifics. And let's start first with, like you just mentioned, you've worked at Google, Waymo, Responsive. What are the common traits of companies that build great leaders?
Sure. I think that one of the most important aspects of building great leadership for a company is really putting an emphasis on the role that the executive and leadership team plays in cascading behaviors through an organization. One thing that you see where companies make mistakes is that they think about leadership or manager development as something that comes from the bottom up or something that is for a specific level within the organization. And really culture, business performance, strategy implementation, all cascades from leadership down. So if a company has limited resources, it really needs to put the focus on not just developing leadership capabilities for the executive team or their relationship with the board, but ensuring that their behaviors are visible, consistent, and cascade through the organization from their direct reports all the way down to the individual contributors in the company.
And that sounds like common sense. Why do you think that companies, maybe because I'm in HR, it sounds like common sense, but let me ask a question to that, where if you're cascading your behaviors and cascading what you want as successful traits, why are people not doing that when that seems like common sense to me?
I think because the leadership level in organization, there are limited mechanisms for enforcing behaviors or embedding behaviors in the way that leaders function. And so once a person is in a leadership role, especially if they're in the executive team, there are limited mechanisms for that person's behavior to be influenced by others in the leadership team. And so to the extent to which the leadership team itself can be self-enforcing in terms of determining which behaviors, which competencies, or which attributes align with the culture code of that company, with the values, the mission, and the vision of the company, and then the behaviors that need to be elicited both among themselves and other people in the organization in order to achieve the business strategy, that's really where the most important investment takes place.
So it sounds like common sense, but it's not that easy. And so that's why you don't have a lot of rubber that's able to meet the road to make it happen, it sounds like then. Okay.
Exactly. And those enforcement mechanisms within the leadership team are particularly challenging unless you have an outside facilitator, an outside coach, or you have a competency model or leadership attributes that are very well understood by each of the members of the leadership team and that they hold each other accountable to those behaviors.
So on that note, the executive team says we need a leadership development program. Go figure it out, Brian. Go figure it out, Michelle. Many times at all the different types of companies, leadership programs, they sound great on paper, but they don't really seem to move the needle. They don't create the impact. What do you think the biggest gap is between the leadership theory and the actual real world leadership that's just not connecting?
Sure. So the most effective organizational development and then in turn learning and development initiatives are directly aligned with the strategic objectives of the company. And to the extent to which a leadership development program or an organizational development initiative can be aligned and mapped out to the business strategy, the greater the impact will be because those behaviors then map to performance. Being able to connect those leadership attributes to the behaviors and then ultimately to the results that that functional leader needs to be executing on, the greater the chance of success for the company. And if a company can then cascade that again through the entire company, through clear understanding of OKRs, objectives and key results, and linking those to the KPIs that have been defined for company performance, the greater the likelihood of success.
Okay, so I'm doing it right. I have OKRs. My objective is to get $100 million in revenue. KRs are whatever. I don't even get into the details of that. You're saying that the leadership program, what I'm trying to get is what does that look like to connect what you want out of the leadership program to the OKR? Can you give me an example of what that actually looks like then?
Sure. So, for instance, if a company has measurable results that they are attempting to achieve, which is that most companies have measurable strategic objectives, right? They are trying to expand into a new market. They are trying to capture a certain number of customers. They are trying to scale headcount so that they can build new products or scale operations across different geographies. Those are all measurable, that have measurable impact, right, on the company's success. So the extent to which leadership behaviors and in turn employee behaviors can be linked to those metrics, the greater chance for success because those behaviors are defeating into how that person's performance is defined.
So as I'm building out my OKRs for the following year, would I then say, here's the behaviors that are going to allow us to get there? Is that what people do? Or is that what you could do? Or like, how are
So
people determining what those behaviors are, I guess?
Sure. So in that regard, having a learning and development uh, leader within the organization who understands how different behaviors and different competencies map out to the implementation of strategy or the execution of strategy is crucial. And so mapping behaviors to results or to the behaviors of teams and then in turn to results is essential for successful leadership development and then successful strategy implementation.
On the flip side, so we just talked about kind of the executive leadership team, but on the early end, so I'm early in my career. And I'm thinking about how do I develop my leadership skills? Because one day I want to be an executive. What would you say, or what's your recommendation for some of the first things they should start doing today?
Sure. So again, focusing on the behaviors that achieve results because results and measurable results really are difficult to challenge. That also, though, means that there are behaviors that if you're in a people managing role need to result in supporting your team's success, right? And one of the things that I think is particularly interesting within the leadership space are looking at different leadership models. One leadership model is the direct reports and team members serve the needs of the leader, right? The other way is to think of it the opposite. And the opposite is what we think of as servant leadership, which is how the leader serves the needs of their team members so that the team members, themselves can optimize their performance. And when one sort of flips the model of leadership upside down from people serving the manager or the leader to the leader serving their team, there's huge opportunities for performance to be multiplied and compounded in a way that's difficult when individuals are serving the needs of the leader.
It feels almost natural, right? Because I know the way I visualize it is almost like mama bird and the baby birds, and mama bird is the leader. And as baby birds, you're feeding us the worms, right? Why do you think leaders are not thinking of it that way of like, let me serve my team so then they could all move the same way versus I am standing up high and you must serve me? Is it an ego thing? Is it I don't have enough time to actually think about it? But once again, maybe because I'm in HR and I've been in it for a while, but it seems like common sense to your point, but I've really never heard anybody call it out of like moving around your way of thinking of serving your people versus them serving you? Why isn't that not happening more?
Sure. I think that it goes to the way that human beings organize. And I think that we naturally organize into hierarchies. One of the things that we've talked about before is the difference between flat organizations and hierarchical organizations, or how different types of organizations are making innovations in terms of how they organize. Well, the reality is that we really don't have any meaningful examples of organizations at scale, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000 or more employees, where there aren't hierarchies that look familiar to us from over the last 500 years, whether it's military or government or the church or as companies grew through the Industrial Revolution.
I'm not saying necessarily switching that historical way that we do and have hierarchies, but it's, for me, it feels like it's a mind frame of the leader, not necessarily let's change the org structure. It's more like, as a leader, this is how I'm going to show up. No?
Yeah. And so I think that a big part of that is how leaders and how organizations reward people's behaviors, right? So, for instance, it's very common that somebody with strong technical skills will get promoted to the next level without any regard for their people managing skills, right? And so when a person is essentially told that their behaviors, their technical behaviors and their is more important than their people managing contribution, then their goal is to get other people to contribute to their increase in performance, right? When you have a leader thinking about their role through this idea of servant leadership, or how they serve the needs of their team, that's a reverse of that role where the manager is now leading the success of their team members and not necessarily having other people feed into their success.
So it is though more than just a mindset shift. There's actual, you have to show up differently.
There are definitely behavior shifts that need to take place there as well. So, for instance, instead of the manager thinking only about how their team members perform into their vision for what the team does, they need to think about how do they maximize the contributions of each of their team members.
Managers, if you're listening, you really should take advantage of that one, because that, if you maximize your people, you're going to look like a better manager versus the other way around, which I know it's traditional and it's worked, but at the same time, you could probably get a lot more done. That's very interesting. Kind of shifting on that. So I know you've worked on company-wide strategies, org development, and that's kind of your wheelhouse of figuring out how do we develop and how do we structure our teams. What do you think is some of the common mistakes companies make when they're trying to scale teams?
I think that when they're trying to scale teams, they don't necessarily pay attention to the early investment that bringing in organizational development or leadership development practitioners can have on the success of the company. They typically wait too long to focus on the strategic impact that the people function can make and the foundational capabilities that bringing in organizational development or leadership development or learning and development practitioners early on in their scaling life cycle can have on ensuring success later on. Because what ends up happening is that they reach a point where their capabilities hit a threshold. But that's with the leadership team, the CEO, the founders. And that's when they bring people in to help them build their organization, a healthy organization. And by waiting too long, what happens is they lose an opportunity for those practitioners to focus on building. And instead, they end up focusing on fixing. And that fixing is itself a time-consuming process because there has to be so much unlearning that takes place before learning takes place. And rather than focusing early on learning how to grow and how to scale.
We were talking about this before I hit record. They bring you and a team like you in after the fact, and they're somehow expecting your team to perform miracles and turn everybody around in 2 quarters, 3 quarters, if not less. And it doesn't work that way. And so what I've also seen, to your point, is bring them in early. But I would also like to add, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's not just, if you can't bring them in early and you still have to bring them in, you have to think about the long game and not giving up and abandoning ship after 12 months of trying to have this huge organizational change. And Michel, come in here and make all my leaders better. You have 3 days to do it, right? Like, where would a company, if they really want to maximize what you and teams like you do, is this like a 2 to 5 year exercise? Obviously, as long as possible, but when do you really start seeing the rubber meeting the road.
Right. So, especially with rapidly growing technology companies and startups where we work, organizational change, culture, learning and development tend to move at a fairly glacial pace compared to the strategic pivoting that startups can make, right? And there needs to be a better understanding that learning and development, organizational development, culture, and all of the different levers that we have within those domains tend to have a fairly slow impact on the organization. And so the ability of the organization to forecast its needs as long in advance as possible and understanding what L&D, OD, coaching, and culture components need to be influenced and improved in order to achieve those business strategies, the better. And that I think has been, that's a particularly challenging space for technology companies because they want to do everything yesterday, and that just doesn't happen when you're looking at changing human behavior.
It's tough to do it with 5 people, let alone if you have 100,000 or 5,000 even. So it's always kind of funny and sad at the same time that it's like, well, why can't you figure out how to change human nature? Speaking of rapidly changing AI, and we'll talk more about this as well. But what are you seeing already what are you seeing from AI how are they already transforming leadership and people strategy? What are you seeing on the ground since you're right in it?
Sure. So, one of the things that I think is becoming very, very visible is that given the fact that HR and people functions are typically very under-resourced because they're seen as cost centers within an organization, is that AI is creating new opportunities to make those functions more efficient and able to provide their services within the company with a smaller headcount. That's also, looking at that the other way around, it's actually making it so that HR and people teams can provide greater offerings and scale an organization again without changing their internal headcount as much. And one of the areas that's most evident, like right now, even at these, early nascent stages of AI in the workplace, is in data analysis and data dissemination. Understanding, helping a people team understand the massive amounts of data they have on the organization in order to make informed decisions that can forecast the direction a company will go and then provide learning and development or organizational development initiatives that support that success.
That's a really good point. I was visualizing as you were talking it, but you just mentioned a few minutes ago, if you can tie your behaviors to OKRs, right? And so I feel like HR has not all the data, but probably in some ways more data than other parts of the business, obviously for the people type of data. Just even today, I used ChatGPT to summarize all of my performance review and spit out what are the top competencies and the top KPIs and what makes somebody great versus good and what makes somebody good versus okay. And I did all that in 5 minutes to funnel this all back up to the business. And so what you're saying is we can use the data to disseminate. You shouldn't downsize your HR teams anymore. AI is not going to be downsizing your support teams, but all it is just going to be supercharging, or it should be supercharging it, right?
Exactly. It's going to be supercharging HR teams, making them much more data driven, bringing them much closer to being strategic partners across the organization. Also, the opportunities to gather more frequent data points on behaviors and impact across an organization is going to have an enormous influence on the role of HR and people in determining learning and development needs. So as people need to continuously learn about their evolving relationship with technology and how they partner with technology for the business's success, and also getting data and be able to use data in more dynamic ways so that companies can make decisions based on data in a way that previously was being gathered on an annual basis or a quarterly basis in a way that is going to be much, much more dynamic.
Yeah. I'm actually going to take some of what you just said now. I'm just formulating my game plan in my mind because you're like, right, I need to take the data and make sure I'm getting it up to the leadership. So as we're rolling out our FY26 goals, that data should be there to help them make that decision. And that's where we don't do that. And that's a really good call. Okay.
Exactly. Or I'll give you an example. Most companies have a semi-annual or an annual performance review process, right?
Uh-huh.
That means that between that individual and their manager, there are essentially two opportunities, a mid-year and an end of year opportunity to get a performance review, have there be a feedback conversation, and then that person then has opportunities to make improvements in their behavior and their contributions, right? Well, if we're able to get that type of data, say for instance in a performance review process or some other type of feedback process on an ongoing basis, that gives individuals and teams opportunities to use feedback much more dynamically to then influence behaviors again more dynamically and more directly linked to the execution of the business strategy.
I'm just light bulbs are going off because I'm like, I took the comments from the review, but I didn't think about taking the feedback on where are my problem managers or the managers that are great. And there's another few levels that I can actually dig into. That's a really good call. That's
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you are able to get feedback fairly quickly on your successes or the challenges that you're having in your work, rather than waiting 6 months down the line for that mid-year review or another 6 months for the annual review to then learn, oh, wow, if I had just gotten that type of feedback 4 months ago, I could have course corrected, made improvements that are going to be beneficial to me as a contributor and also beneficial to the team and the organization's performance. So that I think is a huge area where AI is going to be impacting both the people function and in turn learning and development and organizational development.
And that's a good call because and on the last point there, we'll move on. I can use AI to understand where the themes are across the company and be like, hey, I am going to highlight some issues or some opportunities or some successes, and I can apply that across the entire organization, or I can laser focus on this part of the company also needs the same information and not just hey, manager A, here's some feedback 6 months after the fact. I can actually very quickly say, hey, manager A, here's some feedback. And also, all the other managers that are like you, I can give you that feedback now because I can use AI to identify those people and the themes right away versus just this one off. And that you just light bulbing me right now with where I need to be focused on too. That's a good call.
Yes, exactly. And like imagine, yeah, what you're seeing is what with AI, you could say, okay, here's a best in class mid-level manager in the company. And not only can we combine the data that each individual manager is getting in terms of their own behaviors and their performance, but we can then say, here's a best in class manager, here are their behaviors and how we can then infuse their behaviors into other people, into the behaviors of other managers in a company. That is incredibly powerful.
That's huge. I'm going to start working on that tomorrow. You just,
Exactly. So
okay.
I think there's just really fun stuff that's taking place within learning and development and organizational development, because one of the biggest challenges that we've always had is how do we gather data on behaviors and employee sentiment and engagement, and leadership performance in ways that are as discrete as possible, because people don't want to be spending all of their time completing surveys and
Right.
questionnaires and being in focus groups and one-on-one sessions. They need to be focused on their work. And the extent to which we can gather all of that data on the back end in a way that's discrete and doesn't necessarily involve actively getting it from people, the more we can have people focusing on their work and have that data drive decisions in learning and organ development.
Super exciting. You really have. I got a lot of work to do. All right, let's move on because I could talk about this for another 3 hours. Let's move to the next segment called the Power Up. Let's talk about developing leaders and building high performing teams. Let's dig in a little bit more there. You've obviously coached executives, you've scaled teams, you've led performance management strategies. I'm curious this for myself, but what have you seen as the most underrated leadership skill that separates good from great?
Yeah, so I think that a particularly important leadership skill is because most people who are in leadership roles are in some form or another in the middle of the organization, right? They lead people, but they also are managed by other people. And the extent to which they can think of themselves as a translator of the strategic imperatives that they're getting from their supervisor into something that's tangible and actionable for their team members, that is a huge success factor. Also, the extent to which a manager can always be thinking about how the execution of the work on their team is related to the developing capabilities of their team members. So if a manager thinks of learning and development and developing their team members through the work all the time, They're always going to be upskilling and up-leveling the behaviors of their team members to contribute even more.
I'm trying to think of practically what this looks like. As I'm manager A, I should look at all of my interactions as just a learning moment, or are you saying I should be providing learning opportunities at every point? But what does that look like practically?
Sure. So, one of the approaches that I've found to be most successful within any type of team context is to think about longer term strategic objectives. Most companies have strategic objectives and a vision that's, 1 year, 2 years and beyond. And that's really, really difficult for people on a team, especially for individual contributors, to understand how their work and how their output contributes to those longer term strategic goals. So one approach that is incredibly successful is for a manager to think about distilling their OKRs or their team's performance into sprints. And within those sprints, that it depends on what the company's industry, what industry and what function you are in a company, but the extent to which they can break down their work into sprints, those could be days, 60 days, 100 days, and then back into everything from the performance objectives that they have for that time period. So if they have OKRs or strategic outputs that are required within that time period, think about stretching that an additional 10%. What does the team need to do in order to change how it does its work in order to achieve that stretch objective? That might mean decisions have to get made in a different way. It might mean that they have to collaborate cross-functionally in a different way or coordinate with other functions differently. And it importantly requires the manager of that team to behave differently and to stretch their capabilities and to reflect on how their role as a manager contributes to that team's ability to perform at 10% better than it was doing the previous time period. So defining performance through sprints is a very effective way at getting people over a short period of time to do things differently, to innovate within how they do their work, for that manager to innovate in terms of how they manage, and then ultimately to either perform at a higher level than they did previously. And if not, the risk is low in terms of what they learned through that sprint so that they can retool and iterate for the next sprint. And just always think about their work through the lens of sprints.
That's a major key because what you're saying is instead of just saying we always have the same amount of work, our team is to respond to customer requests and day in, day out, day in, day out, ticket in, ticket out, long task list, and we just check it off. What you're saying is try to find a way thematically to approach your work to say, over the next 90 days, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we want to have these results. But trying to clump it into almost like themes within a certain time frame versus just always just going without an end in sight, essentially, right?
Exactly. So for that manager to think, okay, what do we need to do in order to achieve our OKRs for this time period, for these 90 days, right? And let's then add another 10% to really challenge us. Then for that team and that the role of the manager there, it kind of goes back to flipping the role of the manager upside down, right? And the role of the manager is to serve the needs of their team members. Well, that manager has the opportunity to now capture feedback and capture input from their team members about what works and what doesn't work in terms of how we do our work together. Are there approvals that are creating a bottleneck? Are there ways of decision making that aren't serving us? Are there ways that manager themselves is managing in a way that isn't contributing to improving performance? And to then always be looking at those behaviors and those team dynamics through an objective lens and the lens of change. There are always opportunities to make changes within a team that will result in improved performance.
It's a good call. I'm just thinking about how can I incorporate this in my work, but that's a good call. Switching topics a little bit, but still staying in leadership. EQ, emotional intelligence. I feel like the last 5 to 7 years, 5 years, we've talked about it even more. We talk about it. Everybody's like, you have to have a high EQ to do this role or to be a manager. How do you develop this? Like, why does EQ matter? Let's just start from the basics. And can you develop your EQ? I actually, the previous role, tried to find resources for my sales leaders because having high EQ actually leads to higher sales attainment. And so I try to create my own kind of learning for the managers, but there's there's a few like YouTube videos out there, but not much from what I found, and there probably is. But anyway, how do you develop EQ? Why does it matter?
Sure. So I think there's two things here. One is how do you as a manager or in a leadership role think about EQ? And then how do you distill that in a way that is meaningful for your team members, right? And one of the most important aspects of almost every job is that the person is bringing both their mind, their intellect, their technical skills, but they're also bringing their emotions, they are bringing their stress, they are bringing all kinds of aspects of who they are to work. And so creating as a manager, creating psychological safety for your team members to be who they are, again, goes back to this idea of flipping the leadership model upside down and how does that leader serve the needs of their team members? If a manager is not aware that their team members are stressed, they're going to keep escalating the productivity expectations that they have without realizing that they're going to burn out their employees. Or if they don't have empathy to understand that one of their team members is having a difficult challenge at home, or maybe they're having someone on their family is having a health crisis, or maybe they just had a baby, that having that empathy for understanding the whole person supports that whole person showing up at work fully. And that's what makes it's so important to have high EQ. It's also really important for a manager themselves to be as self-aware as possible about how they're showing up at work. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they getting exercise? Are they eating in a healthy way? Are they themselves stressed? And how do they navigate through stress in a way that's healthy, both for the way they show up at work and their team members? And so all of those things together really, speak to bringing the whole person to work and having a whole person in all of who they are making a contribution.
I agree with everything. And what I'm thinking through is I understand that managers have a billion things on their plate and people have a billion things on their plate, not just managers. And so we focus on the what, get the what done. And to your point, we need to also be focused on the how the work gets done. I think sometimes people struggle with why does the how matter? At the end of the day, I got it done. You can say that, I hurt somebody's feelings or I bulled in a China shop to get the thing done, but it got done. So why are we still talking about it? And so how do we tie business outcomes or revenue or a paycheck? Like how do we make it the fluffy feelings of emotional intelligence and EQ? How do we tie that into something concrete and physical almost of you're not allowing your person to show up and have the psychological safety is actually going to give you a 12% reduction in effectiveness? I don't know. I think that's where we struggle with of your behaviors are actually going to slow you down or not get the results that you're looking for. I imagine you probably know this, but I wonder if there's data to show having a high Q actually shows up on the dollar sign. I mean, on the P&L somewhere or in a way that
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of, why is it that it's not just results, it's also how work gets done that matters, is that if a manager is focused entirely on the tactical implementation of the work, they will get an increase in performance for a short period of time. But it's not sustainable, because when you then put an emphasis both on the what gets accomplished and how it gets accomplished, you start seeing patterns of behavior and patterns of emotions that are showing up in the workplace, which either can be sustained if they're positive, or they can be regressive and diminish over time if they are negative. So for instance, when employees are continuously stressed, or they're not recognized for their work, or their own emotional needs are not taken into account, they may be able to perform at a very high level for a short period of time, but that will not be sustainable. And company success is not based on short-term performance. It is based on long-term performance, sustaining and ensuring intellectual capital remains within a company so that those people can continue improving their contributions. And that comes through, again, people bringing their whole person and their whole selves to work, and that the company has both empathy, EQ, and a focus on results at the same time.
Okay. Uh, once again, I'm just agreeing with all this and everything you're saying. I'm like, how can I incorporate what you're talking about into my everyday? Good call. Let me switch to another topic that we've been kind of talking about. When you're scaling, you're growing fast, which so many places, especially in tech, when you're scaling a company, what do you think is more important? Hiring the right people or developing the people you already have?
So in that regard, it's really is both
I knew
because
you were going to say that, but if wait,
yes,
okay. But
I
if
knew
I
you were
gun to
like,
your head, Michelle,
yeah,
and I need to get an answer. Like if you had to pick one, I know it's both, absolutely. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm just curious as if you had to stack rank it. I guess.
sure. So think of a rapidly scaling company more like an organism, right? And an organism, when it's just two or three people, is really different than when it's 100 people or when it's 500 people. And when you hire people, you're hiring people to enter that organization at that particular snapshot in time. So you hire an employee when and there's five other employees there, right? This person has been hired because they have skills and a mindset to fit into an organization of five. Is that person going to be successful when that person is 100? You want that person to be if they have deep technical expertise or they have important institutional knowledge, or they are leading a team that has been growing. And in order for that company to be successful, they not only have to hire the right person, but they then have to develop that person to be successful in the evolving organizational context, right? And so companies that think about hiring people without development, we're just going to hire the smartest and the best people without developing them. If they're going to do that, they really need to put an emphasis on those people having capabilities to continuously adapt and continuously learn. But that's a very hard skill set to predict.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
so
you almost have to ask.
you need both. You really need both. And then it needs to be communicated from the very beginning of that person's employment relationship with the company that this organization is continuously changing. Roles will change, reporting lines will change, the organization structure will change so that people never get complacent with how an organization is today and expect it not to change, or even worse, resist the changes that are crucial for that company's success.
Yeah, rejecting the changes is almost the worst than not being good at managing them. One more topic here on this in this theme here is uh, performance reviews. We're talking about this, and I think a lot of companies are just wrapping up their cycle. Of course, it all feels like a checkbook exercise. I understand why it's important. I think there are, maybe HR is a little bit more biased towards this, but it normally does feel like a checkbox exercise, especially if you're an IC. What do you think the right way to approach performance management is so it actually feels like you're driving improvement and you're actually bringing value?
Right. So, the research, contemporary research on performance management and performance review cycles is very mixed. Uh, because there has to be an ROI that justifies the 2 or 3 or 4 weeks that a company is going through the review cycle.
Even
And
longer than that. I mean,
even longer than that, and the impact on organization health, on distracting people from their normal work in order to capture this data, which is important and meaningful, again, for a snapshot in time. But is it relevant 6 months down the line? Sure, there are components of it that are, but it needs to be done in as lightweight and as data driven of an approach as possible. Also, there needs to be a tremendous amount of emphasis on the calibration and understanding where there may be some biases within the process that advantage certain demographics within an organization and disadvantage other demographics. And so the extent to which the performance review process can be as data driven and as objective as possible, that will ensure that it is successful. At the same time, though, it's so time consuming and it results in decisions that are quite biased towards the recent behaviors of individuals rather than their entire body of work since the last review cycle. And so these are all factors that need to be taken into consideration when developing a successful performance review cycle. Some companies are saying, let's just get rid of it and focus on only making the reviews of the things that matter. So if there's a promotion, focusing on what the data that needs to be gathered just to make those key promotions. If they're going to be compensation changes, what are the decisions need to be based around that, and not tying it into a comprehensive whole organization cycle.
okay. Because when you're talking about lightweight, I think that's probably $1 trillion solution, right? But have you seen something that works well? Because when I think about the review cycle, you have to first collect peer reviews, then you have to do a self review, then you have to do a manager review, then the manager has to review you, then you have to calibrate, then after calibration, you have compensation probably with it and all the steps that come with that. And then you finally have the conversation 3, 4 months after you started. How do you make this lighter? Because obviously you need to give people the time to do all this, but would I eliminate any of these steps? Or what have you seen that the future of performance management? Is there a way to make this better, faster, lighter? Because I've been trying to think through this forever and I don't know how you do it.
Sure. So, I mean, this is definitely an area where I think that AI is going to have a huge impact, right? Because, gathering more comprehensive data and then disseminating that data in a way that provides insights for the organization in terms of how people are performing differently, how to optimize performance in the organization, how to then promote people who are performing at their best, or even understanding the difference between technical skills or technical contribution and then people managing contribution. Because a lot of companies are making errors in terms of promoting people based on technical skills when really they need to be promoting them on people managing skills. And so the extent to which you can gather data passively without going through the data gathering aspect of the performance review process, the more that you can have this process take place throughout the year or in real time, and then you make decisions based on entire body of work of an individual or a team rather than the typical biases, which is that recent behaviors have a lot more impact on a person's performance review than behaviors from several months before. Another thing is that too often the review cycles are putting such an emphasis on past behaviors and past performance rather than future behaviors and the role that all of this feedback can play in terms of developing that individual's capabilities. Most people just get maybe one-on-one debrief after the review cycle with their manager, and the assumption is that that person now knows all the things that they need to work on without it being really embedded in their work going forward. And so if you can capture data points throughout the year, or in an ongoing or real-time basis, performance review cycles end up becoming a very antiquated process that will be replaced by ongoing continuous data gathering.
Once again, like this has been amazing because my brain is thinking of, instead of doing the traditional review cycle, it's, can I have something that sends a quick message to the manager saying, how did Michelle do this week? What's the one thing they did well? Rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. And then every week you get something. When it's time to review them, it's like you push the button, it automatically collates all of the stuff that you've talked about for that quarter or that month. But you can get more insights a lot faster. So this is going to be interesting. You're right. AI is going to make this hopefully better. I know there's probably a lot of people building something, but this is going to be amazing to see if we can really actually then apply it to how we
Yeah, and it's
actually work.
there are a lot of people who are really resistant to AI and the role that AI will play in our work. And if you look back historically, at what point was there technology that was developed that wasn't somehow eventually incorporated into everything that we do that people previously had resisted? And, AI, like none of us has the capacity to resist AI's influx into our work. And so if we can be champions of it, and not just for an organization, but for how we incorporate it into our work, that's going to make each of us into better contributors for an organization using as many of those tools as possible to maximize our performance and maximize our output.
Let's just move to the next segment, which is called the playbook and winning in the AI driven workplace. That's the perfect segue. Put your crystal ball on or whatever, crystal hat or whatever. Yeah, pull out your crystal ball and think about the next 5 years. Where do you think the biggest shift will happen when it's HR and AI in the next 5 years, and how this all plays in?
Sure. So definitely in terms of how we capture and disseminate and use data within the people function and within learning and development. The other is it's just going to be increasingly essential for every employee to put use of AI at front and center in terms of how they do their work. And that will require them to continuously learn and develop their capabilities in terms of integrating AI tools into their workflow. And so having an openness to continuously invest in learning and in incorporating AI and other technologies into our day-to-day work is going to be what defines our individual success in our roles.
So, to that point, some of the day to day work, hiring, development, We can use it to hire faster, develop better, faster insights. Using AI, though, also could create further bias and other risks. So is there a way that companies should be thinking about using AI the right way as they're, building out their framework for what AI looks like at the company?
Yeah, so it's really thinking about inclusivity in terms of how AI gets implemented within an organization, but also how you're developing people to use it, incorporate it into their work is very important. And ensuring that there are adequate mechanisms to essentially audit how AI tools are being used and ensure that there is equity both in terms of their deployment so that everybody in a specific role or across an organization has access to those tools, because access to those tools is going to determine whether one person does X performance versus one of their peers who's not using those tools. And then also thinking about what are the implications of AI's use in terms of personalization of learning and development will also have an impact on whether one person is perceived as successful in their role and another is not. So personalizing to the extent that it up levels everybody versus focusing on this person developing certain skills and another developing others that don't necessarily align with the requirements of the role.
And that's interesting you said that, because I never even thought about like the demystifying, but also I was going to say what democratization of AI, but basically making sure everybody has access to it, because I have my own subscription to ChatGPT and I've had it now for a year, regardless of what companies are doing. And so companies need to make sure that everybody has access to that because it does set people apart. So that's a really good call out.
Yeah, and one of the exciting aspects of AI, and especially its impact on learning and development, is actually scaling learning and development offerings for a company so that they can be provided comprehensively across an entire demographic within a company. Rather than having to focus on providing it to those people who speak up the most or the ones who demand it.
Right.
And that too is around creating equity and inclusivity in terms of offering learning and development to as many people as possible in a company, or for that matter, to everyone. And that, I think, is one of the most exciting aspects of it that is going to be changing sort of the L&D landscape going forward, because we will be able to provide it to all employees as needed rather than just the ones that are speaking up the most and demanding it for their success.
Like I've always said, DEI is for everyone, regardless of what we're hearing lately. And now, to your point, so should AI. AI should be for everyone just as well.
Yes.
Let me switch topics. This is weird, but I threw these questions in because I'm just personally curious, and I've been seeing this happen a lot. I believe that remote and hybrid work, it's here to stay. The 5 days a week, I think Amazon's doing it, but it's not as common. Have you seen the difference between 5 days in versus remote versus hybrid? What works the best? And I know the answer is probably it depends on the organization, but I'm curious as to companies that are trying to figure out their strategy. Are people making mistakes when they're trying to go remote? Are they making mistakes when they're going hybrid or 5 days a week? Is there a sweet spot that we're not knowing about?
Sure. So if you think historically about the role of management for a company or leadership, is that they led through mechanisms that required people to be in the office, right? Did the person show up on time? Did they leave on time? Does it look like they're working? And those are just antiquated approaches to leadership. The problem is that most leaders of organizations have been in leadership roles and have derived their success through antiquated mechanisms of determining performance. And so contemporary organizations that really want to be on the leading edge, think about management in different ways. They think about it through this lens of how managers serve the needs of their team members and through measurable performance. And measurable performance, a person can be located anywhere. It doesn't matter when they do their work, as long as they're able to coordinate with their team members effectively, whether it's through synchronous work or asynchronous work, whether they're all based in one time zone or whether where their workflows span across the globe. And so it's requiring a greater shift in leadership and management versus employees. Organizations are led by leaders. So leaders are doing what feels most comfortable for them. So organizations that are leading edge are more than happy to cultivate a remote first or distributed workforce because they understand that performance is measurable. They understand that people also that work is needs to be sustainable. And so having people commute an hour in each direction or more each day actually may even diminish their productivity because that is time that that person could actually be using
Right.
to work at home. And then it's the net output, which includes so many other things like people's health, their vacation time, their performance, the cost of real estate, the cost of utilities. All of these things have to be taken into account when looking at whether a company is going to be remote first or in office. And there are certainly niche areas where people do need to be working together physically in the same place.
Right.
That's not going to change. But the bulk of work within the knowledge economy is really going to be around how people can optimize their relationship to their work and the relationship with the rest of their lives in a way that contributes more effectively to the company's success.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. But where I'm at now, we have hybrid. I'm in 2 days a week and it's much needed. I'm actually a fan of it. I've been able to ramp up faster. I have those connections, literally having the, I guess not water cooler, but the little water dispenser, bevy machine talk. There is absolute value in it. I've been in a company where it's fully remote and now I'm at one that's hybrid. I am actually a fan of hybrid, but what I've also seen, and last question on this one, and we'll almost wrap it up because we're already past an hour. Okay, companies are struggling with bringing people back to the office.
Right.
But during COVID, it was like, we're going to be remote forever. And then for me, I personally think that all the real estate guys were like, we're going to crash the economy if we don't get people back in and get our leases filled up. Bringing people back has been a struggle. So have you heard of what is the right approach? Is the future of work remote only? Is it hybrid? Is there or is it going back 5 days a week? Where are you seeing it at?
I think that the future of work, and let's just speak to sort of knowledge industries where people are primarily contributing through their laptop, that what you're going to see is a hybrid model that is based on intentional in-person interactions. And that might require companies to think about a hybrid model where people are clustered, people in the same team or same function are clustered in a similar geography, or making the investment for people to travel to a particular location so that they have intentional, relevant, tangible reasons why they're getting together. So in hybrid models that are not intentional, actually diminish the value of it because say you and I are on the same team. Well, I come to the office Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, and you come to the office Wednesday, Thursday, and Tuesday. Well, we just had one day of overlap. And if it's not intentional, there's no point because most of the time you're going to the office and most of the time that I'm going to the office, we're not going to see each other. So having those intentional reasons, and each team is going to be different. Is it going to be an opportunity to ideate around creative work? Is it going to be an opportunity to prototype something? Or is it an opportunity for us to collaborate on building something or getting a lot of intensive work done together over the course of several days? So I think that the future of knowledge work is really going to be in intentional hybrid models where most of the time people are not going to the office and some of the time they're going to a shared physical location and having deep collaboration that is just focused on a specific output.
That makes sense. I wonder how long. Well, this debate probably will never end. We'll be talking about this forever. But I do think that you're right with that's where it should be going, and we'll see if we can. I know a lot of companies are kicking and screaming to go there, but we'll see. All right, we're at the end of our time, so I don't want to keep going there. I could speak to you for another 3 hours. There's so much good stuff here. Let's wrap this up with the 2-minute drill. Quick fire questions. Quick question, quick answer, and then I'll let you walk out of here. Okay. First one, what is one leadership book that everyone should read?
One leadership book that everybody should read, I think, is Reinventing Organizations. It's really thinking about how organizations are evolving in tandem with how we as humans are evolving, and that our ability to organize, whether, historically that was in a small guild, and then eventually to a small company, and then eventually to large industries, and our ability to think about how we organize and make decisions is really driving our capacity to solve the problems of our contemporary world. Today, it's really looking at how we as humans organize in addition to how we partner with technology that will determine our ability to solve the problems of our day.
Hey, what was it called again? Sorry, I'm
Called
gonna pull it up.
Reinventing Organizations.
Okay. Next,
Yes.
go ahead.
Nope. So that I think is a particularly important book. Also, I think any book that is looking at organizational development provides managers with the understanding of how organizations are structured and organized in order for them to then lead as effectively as possible.
From our view, it makes sense, but it's very, do you understand why we're structured the way we are? And so then you can influence a little bit better. Okay, moving on. What's one skill that's essential for leaders in the next decade?
Continuous learning and integrating of the leading edge technology with the people that they lead. That's just going to be foundational to every organization's success and just keeping a continuous growth learning mindset.
You might have just answered the question, my next one, but if you can give one piece of advice to someone trying to level up in their career, what would it be?
I think that one area that is particularly valuable for people leveling up in their career is to look at the skills needed to be successful one or two levels above where they are and to start learning those skills and approaches now. And so, for instance, if you're looking for your first people managing job, look at what it's like to interview for a mid-level people managing job. And if you're a first-time manager and you're thinking about wanting a job where you can become a supervisor or expanding your contribution, start looking at what are the skills needed to be a director in a company or to be a senior level manager and start speaking that language, start thinking through those lenses, because that then is going to have a huge impact on how you talk about your work with people who are having decision making in terms of your next role.
That's smart. So you're looking past your nose, right? You're looking a couple
Exactly.
steps ahead, which is smart. Normally we're like, are you doing the next role? And that's how you get promoted versus you're saying, no, look a little bit further. That actually is going to help
Exactly.
you.
Because learning is a lot slower than than your potential for promotion, right? And so you want to be thinking about what do I need to be learning today in order for my skip level role in the future?
Last question. I am building an HR app. I'm HR. What do you think is one must-have HR element that should be in any HR tool or the tool that I'm building? What do you think is the most needed thing out of all the things we talked about today?
I think that probably the most important aspect there is what data is being continuously gathered and how are those data points being used by whatever platform you're developing, and putting the focus on learning and development or organizational development, the extent to which you can increase the frequency of data gathering around a person's behavior, the more impact that's going to have on changing that person's behavior and having to develop the skills they need in order to be successful at the pace needed by that organization.
You gave me a good idea on thinking through performance reviews and how to make that better. Okay, Michelle, this has been amazing. I mean, a billion joules of information and tons of insights. I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your experience, your strategies. I'm using a lot of this. I'm already thinking about how I'm going to show up tomorrow a little bit better. Before we wrap up, do you have a book that you're writing or you've written, or is there any way that people wanted to find out more from you and wanted to learn or just stay away from you? Because sometimes you might consult or something. So I want to give an opportunity
Absolutely.
to share anything.
Well, I'm in this field because I love to help organizations and individuals succeed in both in their roles and what the company is doing. And so please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Michel Nabti on LinkedIn. Please don't hesitate to reach out because I'm always happy to be of support, even if it's just around mentorship around a particular challenge or to talk about a project that could be meaningful for you as an individual or for your organization.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Michelle. You've been amazing. I really do appreciate you. This has been the Level Up Podcast, otherwise known as How to Be Better at Your Job, which you've learned a ton today about how to be better at your job. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe. We appreciate that, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.